Hello again, YouTube. This is Peter with you once again, here to give my review of The Last Jedi. Going into this movie, I did not watch any early reviews or hear any spoilers. After watching the movie, I have yet to watch anyone else's review. I do understand, and I've heard in a general sense, that this movie is polarizing. Some people really don't like it, some people love it, and I have to say that I understand that, because although I did overall enjoy the movie, I felt that the movie had structural problems which kept it from being quite as satisfying as it might have been. And here's the briefest way I can describe that. The movie builds to what I can only call a false climax, or a sequence in which all of the main plot threads come together, but it's not quite satisfying in and of itself, and then the movie keeps going after that. So in other movies, let's use the other Star Wars movies as very good examples. The first Star Wars movie, the entire plot builds, courtesy of John Williams' literal crescendo when Luke blows up the Death Star. And a major part of what made Star Wars popular in terms of the people who went into the theater and saw that movie is that the movie was a ride. It was a thrill, and they got a major sense of excitement and release when Luke goes on that attack run and blows up the Death Star. Everything just builds and builds, and then boom, Death Star explodes, and it is incredibly satisfying. And yes, I know I'm using thinly veiled sexual analogies, but when you get down to it, isn't entertainment a form of pleasure? And isn't things like stories structured in a way to bring on a catharsis, as Aristotle put it, a emotional release? So stories build towards climaxes that are supposed to, you're supposed to feel something. You're supposed to feel a sense of elation as the rebels have defeated the Empire and blown up the Death Star. So the first movie does that perfectly. The second Star Wars movie, The Empire Strikes Back, yes, I know it's actually Episode 5, whatever. It has a two-part ending with Princess Leia and Lando trying to rescue Han Solo and Luke Skywalker confronting Darth Vader. And both of these endings are basically happening simultaneously. And even though, in a sense, it ends on a darker note, there is the music at the end, and as they're looking off at this distant galaxy, and with this swelling John Williams music, you are left with a sense of hope, and the ending of it works. The third movie, once again, it splits even further. You have a three-part ending where you have the fleet attacking the Death Star, you have Luke confronting Darth Vader and the Emperor, you have the rebels on Endor blowing up the shield generator, and each of those stories climax one after the other. They play off of each other. They blow up the shield generator, which allows the fleet to attack the Death Star, and Luke's confrontation with the Emperor. All of these things, they all simultaneously build to the same point. Now, maybe Return of the Jedi might have worked better had they been able to streamline that a bit more, but I actually think overall the climax of Return of the Jedi works pretty well. Whereas in The Phantom Menace, they tried to split it into 4, and as was pointed out to George Lucas famously, you can see this in the making of The Phantom Menace, that when you're trying to have 4 different things happen at once, you start to get to the point of emotional whiplash. Now, emotional whiplash is not quite the problem of this movie, but rather that when these 3 plot lines of the movie, you have the Rey, Luke, you have the Rey Kylo Ren storyline, you have the Resistance trying to flee from the First Order storyline, and you have the Finn storyline. All of these things are basically brought to a conclusion by two of the main characters being on the the First Order flagship or whatever it is, and the admiral of the Resistance fleet basically going to pulling a wharf, and, you know, perhaps it is a good day to die, and going to ramming speed. And yes, I was totally thinking of that scene from Star Trek First Contact when that scene happened. Prepare for ramming speed. And I also thought when it happened, like, man, that is an amazingly effective tactic. I would just be creating drone ships that their entire thing was just going to lights, you know, ramming another ship at light speed, because that was amazingly effective. So anyway, all of these things are brought together by the Resistance ship slamming into the flagship of the First Order, and with two of the main characters from two of the storylines on that ship, and it affecting what's happening with them. But for example, with Finn's storyline, Finn just spends this entire movie trying his best and failing spectacularly. And they try and give it a sense of victory for Finn, even though his actions inadvertently got much of the Resistance killed, because the person that he found to sneak on to the First Order ship ended up betraying them, and that's what got a lot of the Resistance killed. He has this fight with Phasma, which honestly I don't really feel the movie earned. Maybe it's just because I haven't seen The Force Awakens in a while. I didn't watch it immediately before going to see this movie. And so maybe I just don't quite remember the sense of tension between Captain Phasma and Finn and the dynamic there. Or maybe they just pulled it out of their ass specifically for that scene to give him a boss battle and a moment of triumph. The confrontation with Rey and Kylo Ren and Snoke, I personally felt a little let down by, because just as they were starting to elaborate on Snoke and give us a sense of who he is without really explaining it, they, spoiler alert, kill him off before I really felt like I had a sense of who exactly this character was and where he fit into the scheme of things. Maybe they were just trying to say, yeah, it doesn't really matter. It's one of those details, you know, go read some other stupid secondary novel. I'm sure now that the character's dead, they'll be happy to write, you know, 50 billion other stories about him in the expanded universe, whatever they're calling it now. So all of those things build to this false climax, none of which were particularly satisfying. Except for the ramming, the ramming part. That was pretty awesome and surprisingly effective. Unlike those bombers at the beginning of the movie. The bombers, though, if you have to have other attack ships clear the way by getting rid of all the turbo lasers, that seems like, from a strategic point of view, just an unmanageable strategy. And those even then, those bombers just got blown out of space left, right, and center. They were terrible, and made no real sense. But then again, Star Wars is just one of those things where they'll come up with an idea, and then in the movies, and they'll rationalize it later in some sort of expanded universe novel or comic book or whatever else. And there's a whole cottage industry of explaining away every little detail of Star Wars, even if it doesn't actually make any real sense. And so the people who get really into it and read all that stuff can feel smug and superior that they know all these details of Star Wars that are lost on everyone else, and other people just think it is weird or doesn't make sense or is a plot hole. So anyway, after the movie comes to a false climax, it continues. And that's honestly the way that I felt watching the movie, was once it got down to the planet and the First Order is attacking, I felt this sense of, isn't this over yet? What can this possibly still be building towards? And to be fair, the scene with Luke and Kylo Ren and that sequence was probably the most satisfying part of the movie. Yet at the same time, I don't quite feel like the movie built to it properly, because it almost felt like a deus ex machina, and what I'm calling Chekhov's quip, because the script for this movie clearly has modern script writing sensibilities, and Luke mentions offhandedly in a quip, you know, what am I supposed to do? Walk out there with a laser sword and confront the whole First Order myself? And that's exactly what he does. It becomes Chekhov's quip. And I'm pretty sure, although I can't remember it as clearly, I'm pretty sure there's at least one or two other Chekhov's quips in this movie, where once it's mentioned, it's gotta fire by the third act. In spite of that, I do feel that the Luke confronting Kylo Ren part of the movie was pretty satisfying, even if they didn't necessarily build to it properly. However, in the scene where the First Order, or the Resistance, I'm getting confused by these terms. Let's call them the Empire and the Rebels. I think that would be better, right? So in the scene where Rey moves the rocks, that was the other Chekhov's quip. Okay, yeah, where he says it's not about just moving rocks. Yeah, okay, Chekhov's quip, this offhanded thing that he mentioned. She's like, oh, wait, Force, move rocks, yeah. So when she moves the rocks to let the Resistance escape, I felt like that should have been a bigger moment. And in that moment, I kind of felt like, yeah, where's Rey in all of this? Like they just sort of pushed her to the side when it maybe should have been more of her movie. I felt that the end of the movie basically could have done better by Rey. At the very end of the movie, I did like the scene where the kids are talking about the legend of Jedi Master Luke Skywalker, and you see the one kid use the Force to pull the broom to him. I thought that was very subtle and very cool. At the same time, though, I felt that one of the things that held back this movie is that the military situation between the First Order and the Resistance was not explained or show-don't-telled in a way that gave the sense of urgency throughout the movie to pay off in the end. It just sort of felt like you're just given a premise. Okay, the Resistance is totally on the run and down to their last couple of capital and support ships. And that's the situation you're thrown into. And I personally felt like, what? And the First Order, even though they've had the Starkiller base destroyed, which probably was a massive drain on their resources to build to begin with, they have this massive fleet with lots of capital ships and these huge dreadnought ass-kicker ships, and it's like, wait, what is happening here? The movie ends with the fighters of the rebellion or the resistance or whatever the hell they're called whittled down to only a handful of people who can carry on the spark of the rebellion or the resistance or the fight against the New Order or whatever the hell it's called. And yet, for myself personally, I felt that the impact of that, on one hand, although it resonated with me thematically, there was an intellectual part of my brain that's like, wait a minute, this is just compounding the plot holes from the last movie, because I don't mean to get pedantic here, but this is my video and I'm going to get pedantic and go on a tangent anyway. In The Force Awakens, I didn't really understand the political situation. So there's a republic, but there's a resistance, and there's the First Order, and then I did some like Wikipedia looking up, and apparently there's a galaxy far, far away, and the Republic controls most of that galaxy, except there was a pocket of the galaxy that was controlled by the First Order, which was built from the remnants of the Empire. The First Order was able to hold on to a portion of the galaxy far, far away. Now, how they had the resources to build Starkiller Base, let alone this huge fleet of capital ships, whereas the Resistance, who was sort of part of the Republic but not part of the Republic, was only able to scrap together a few ships here and there. That didn't really make any sense, but this movie just compounded that, because it begins with this completely outmatched situation where the Resistance is completely outmatched by the First Order and sets this weird and goofy tone. Personally, what I think would have been better for an opening of this movie, I hate to say it, but something closer to Revenge of the Sith, where there's a major battle between capital ships, and the Resistance gets the shit kicked out of it and gets a bunch of their capital ships destroyed. And that would have given a sense of, wow, the First Order has become really powerful, and the Resistance is in dire straits because it just had a whole bunch of its fleet destroyed. Instead, you're just sort of given the situation. And of course, it showed the capital of the Republic planet being destroyed by Starkiller Base in the last thing, but that only raises other questions like, wait a minute. Number one, why did the Republic only have one fleet, which they kept apparently at all times around their capital for no good reason, and while the planet was being attacked and blown up by Starkiller Base, none of the people on any of the Republic fleet ships had the presence of mind to do an emergency jump to light speed? Like, what? Say Pearl Harbor, for example, that wasn't the entire American fleet. That was only the Pacific fleet. That might have been many of our best capital ships, but first of all, not many of them were actually permanently destroyed. Second of all, the U.S. that wasn't the entirety of the U.S. Navy. It made no sense. Again, there's this whole cottage industry of rationalizing every little thing in these Star Wars movies, but yeah, no, I don't care what rationalization you came up with. Having only one fleet and having it always around your capital when you're a republic spanning most of a galaxy, that makes no sense. It didn't make any, the military and political situation that this movie asks the audience to assume did not make any sense to me, and I refuse to read all the stupid extended universe novels and comics and whatever just to go watch a movie. And so, assuming you're just be like, wow, the Resistance is suddenly the complete underdogs, I can shrug my shoulders and say okay, but at the same time, I just feel like it's that way because the plot needs it to be, because the plot needs the Resistance to be whittled down as little as possible. I imagine what I imagine in this galaxy far, far away is that there must be other ships. And maybe that since the capital of the Republic is destroyed, power has become decentralized, because they do talk about trying to get a transmission out to send for help for other potential allies. So they probably could rebuild a coalition of different planets to resist the First Order, but they've lost that centralization. I don't know. There must be more. There must be more ships and fleets that they could draw on. It just doesn't. The military situation in this movie didn't make any sense. But whatever. That only slightly distracted from the movie. But as I said, I felt like if you had begun the movie with showing the Resistance really getting their ass kicked and really losing a lot of ships, it would have created a greater sense of stakes. It also would have made you understand the situation better, instead of just having them, you know, a bunch of support ships flying up to a capital ship, and it's like, this is all that's left? How did that happen? And of course, the whole timeline where it seems like one part of the story takes place, you know, several months or quite a while after the previous movie, whereas the Rey storyline obviously picks up immediately from where the last movie left off. But yeah, whatever. That's just the intellectual part of my brain. It's Star Wars, you know, turn your brain off. It's just entertainment or whatever. So if you want to attempt to explain this to me because you've read all of these extended universe novels, if you want to explain it to me in the comments section, sure, why not? I can deal with reading comments in my own video, but I'm not going to go read some novel to try and understand, or probably several novels and several comic books, knowing the marketers at Disney, to understand how it is that the Resistance got in this situation in between the movies. That's more than enough ranting about this movie. Maybe at some point I'll make a more detailed analysis of this movie, but before I do that, I want to watch some of the other reviews, make sure I'm just not repeating what everyone else and their mother has said about this movie. Have a good whatever time it is.